Hello and welcome to this special briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. I am Jonathan Beck, Director of Content. Our topic today is the Northern Front and the escalation with Hezbollah, and our special guest is Sarit Zehavi, President and founder of the Alma Center of Education and Research, which follows the Northern Front and researches Hezbollah, and also personally a resident of the area. So I want to begin, first of all, Sarit, by asking you, I personally have the Red Alert app on my phone that tells me whenever a siren goes off anywhere in the country, and my phone was vibrating all night. I had a lousy night's sleep. How was your night? Did you get any sleep last night?
Hardly. Actually, we don't need the alerts all over. We don't need the application. By the way, in some parts today it didn't even work. We just heard the bombs, and that's how we woke up. Because wherever it was in Israel, we heard the blasts here. I live 9 kilometers from the border, so I don't know what exactly we heard, but it was crazy. Throughout the night, few times, and in the morning. I even took some pictures from my balcony of the interceptions of the missiles that were on their way to Acre. And we didn't go out today, neither to work nor to school. There is no school over here. I'm talking to you from my bomb shelter at home, basically. And yet, I must say that this is not new to us. It's very important for me to emphasize that what happened tonight and this morning is very new for many people in Israel, but it's not new to us. This is our experience here up north since the war started. Almost every day. We hear the blasts, day and night. We have the sirens, we see the interceptions, we see the rockets and the drones. It was an unbearable reality in the past 11 months.
Yeah, so to emphasize, I don't know if there's any listeners on the line who are not aware, but while things have come to a head over the past few days, let's say since Tuesday, I want to remind all our listeners that on October 8th, Hezbollah, unprovoked, started shelling Israel's north, causing the evacuation of residents, and this kind of war of attrition, of tit for tat, continued for 11 months. But something happened last week. I'm sure everyone is also aware of this. We had the so-called beeper attack, a modern-day Trojan horse attack, which was attributed to Israel. I'm not going to go into the assessments now if this is Israel or someone else, but in any case, this attack, and then the next day another attack on larger devices, and then on Friday a strike, this time that Israel did claim responsibility for, where it eliminated Ibrahim Akil and top members of the Hezbollah command, changed the picture on the ground, and we're now with Hezbollah not at this attrition new normal, but in a different phase. So still yesterday was more intense in both sides. Yeah, the Israeli strikes and the Hezbollah strikes. Now, you wrote an article that's yet to be published about what should be done now going forward with Hezbollah. Can you, before we go to the mechanism of the day after, can you tell us what you think needs to be done militarily at the moment?
I think that we should continue. I think that we shouldn't, get used to the achievements. It's not enough, these achievements. They are very important what happened. I think it was a damage that made a lot of confusion and damaged the command and control of Hezbollah as an organization, which is, it's really difficult to have an organizational conduct of an army, and this is what is Hezbollah, when you don't have how to communicate, and 3,000 of your commanders or military operatives basically cannot function. But at the same time, look what is actually happening. Hezbollah is using its own people as human shields, and most of the assets of Hezbollah that are based in the villages or in Beirut were not attacked. They are still intact. You see this by the amount of casualties in Lebanon. It is clear that as long as Lebanese population is not leaving its towns and villages, it will not get hurt from missiles that are not being launched by the IDF. IDF is targeting areas which are open areas and very, very little other things. So it means that many of the assets of Hezbollah still exist and still threatening us. We need to deal with that as well. And there are a few ways to do it. You mentioned Hulata that talked about the long-range missiles array. This missile array is based mainly in Beirut, in the dense areas of Beirut. I think there are a few more options, not instead, but more. First, the fact that we got the highest commanders of Hezbollah is extremely important to the capability to function of this organization. And as long as there are operational opportunities, this is highly important to continue to do that. Second, I think that part of the main sources of power of Hezbollah is the civilian infrastructure of Hezbollah. This is a state within a state. And the state within a state of Hezbollah is part of terror, is part of the mechanism of terror. It is financing terror, it is enabling terror, it is enabling Hezbollah to make the Lebanese human shields, creating a cover, indoctrination of hate, and it is very important to threaten that as well, whether it's finance, services, or energy, whatever, that actually push the Lebanese state away from its people. This is on the military level, I think, some ideas.
Can you say what you mean by the civilian infrastructure of Hezbollah? Because what do you mean? Like there's schools, what kind of facilities are we talking about?
Look, Hezbollah has everything. Our decision makers will have to choose. I think schools are less of a damage to Hezbollah than banks, for example. This could be better. We published an article about that a few months ago. On also targeting the heads of this consulate. The name is Executive Consul. The Executive Consul is the enabler of the military wing of Hezbollah because it is creating all these alleged services to the population, but actually undercover it is military operation. It's part of its military operation. We shouldn't forget that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization that has a military branch and a civilian branch, and this civilian branch was built in order to serve the military branch. And that's why it's so important to damage this as well. If we want to look to what we call in Hebrew the day after, we must make sure that there is only one state in Lebanon, which is the state of Lebanon, and not Hezbollah.
Okay, but I mean, after Tuesday, even though Israel did not officially claim responsibility, let's say the mainstream media and Western diplomats mostly lauded Israel for what would be the opposite of a terror attack, like a very targeted assassination or not assassination, maiming of people who are quite obviously Hezbollah operatives because those beepers were issued to Hezbollah agents and commanders, etc. Do you think Israel would have any legitimacy to target militarily banks and such? Even though, as you say, these are serving the terror organization, the optics of targeting, the cons and all that stuff are problematic, I would say. Don't you think?
I think we don't have legitimacy to anything, as we've seen in the past few months. I'm not suggesting to attack school unless there are rockets in the school that are about to be launched against us. But I am suggesting to target the sources of the money of this terrorist organization. Moreover, many of these, I'll call it organizations or services, are already acknowledged in many places in the world as terrorist infrastructures. Okay, the banks of Hezbollah are designated as terror units, Kart Hassan, for example, the gas stations of Hezbollah as well. These are recognized terrorist infrastructures.
By the way, when you say this, do you mean just in Lebanon? Because last week we had Dr. Eyal Pinko from Alma Center, and he characterized Hezbollah as the world's largest drug baron with a massive infrastructure in Europe, South America, etc. So are you also talking about harming their assets abroad?
I think that now we should focus, and our main goal is to bring the people back home. And there are enough targets on our borders in Lebanon to do that. We would love to have the assistance of international players fighting Hezbollah. I've been saying that from day one, that it's not enough to have the assistance with defense. We need the assistance with offense, because eventually Hezbollah and its Iranian boss are threatening all that share the same values of democracy. It's not about us at all.
Understand. What I would like to also add, not just the Al Khulata, but the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, literally about an hour ago, said that our actions against Hezbollah will continue until we can get the northern residents back home. Now, if we go back, let's do a quick math, 18 years, in 2006, we had a war against Hezbollah with a ground incursion, and it ended with a UN resolution which essentially on paper still stands, and that forces Hezbollah to stay north of the Litani. So before we discuss your ideas for the day after, I would like to also ask you, should Israel now escalate the military strikes against launchers, as Khulata say, as you say we should do? One of the other options is a ground incursion into Hezbollah. Now, we know that the maximalist rhetoric of Nasrallah is, just come into the south of Lebanon, we'll make it a graveyard, etc. But is Hezbollah now, after the Beeper attack and with the problems of command and control, can you characterize what kind of threat a ground incursion would pose for the Israeli army if it decides to go to send land forces inside?
I think it will be very similar to what we've seen, except the military operatives of Hezbollah are much more experienced than those of Hamas, because they fought in Syria during the civil war, and they learned there how to maneuver big forces, the scale of brigades, how to occupy territories, etc. I think that they will try to infiltrate into Israel, while Israel will try to encourage into Lebanon. This is definitely an option. I believe that they will fight back better than they did in the Second Lebanon War, because this is what they were training for in the past 18 years. They learned the lessons. They were not prepared in 2006 for ground operations and ground warfare, and they are much more prepared. Yet, again, with regard to command and control, they were damaged. We cannot ignore that, not only with the pagers, but also when we speak about the elite unit of Hezbollah with one brigade, many of the commanders, like I think 11 commanders, were killed with Ibrahim Akil in Beirut on Friday. And this is also very important for their functioning. So, again, with the achievements, it doesn't mean that IDF will not see any resistance if it will encourage. But I think that the situation now is much better than it used to be a week ago with regard to our capability to talk about eliminations of capabilities of Hezbollah, which for me as a resident of the North was very, very important to continue to live here in security. Like, I couldn't see any agreement that is being signed without taking off the capabilities of Hezbollah. This would mean another fiction.
Okay, so by the way, I did not ask you, do you think such an escalation against the launchers, etc., necessitates a ground incursion, or can this be done without ground forces?
It's not the same. The launches that Khulata talked about are not in South Lebanon. They are further up. So it's just not the same mission. The mission to enter into South Lebanon to create a security belt is in order to clear completely any presence of terrorists from the areas next to the border. Terrorists that will put the families that will go back to live next to the border at risk. It's two different missions.
Understand. So I'd like to ask you now to go to the second part of the article that you very courteously sent me before it was published, which you call the 10 strikes against Hezbollah. And there you characterize a day after solution which is dissimilar to 1701 and is not UN based, and also gives Israel a kind of permission to immediately go back in and strike in case of violations. Can you put in your own words the solution you're proposing?
I must say, first of all, the principle here, before even the details. You know, I'm not a religious person. I'm secular, even though I live across the synagogue. All of a sudden, I thought about the biblical story of the Hebrews and Egypt, and I thought that during all these 10 strikes against Pharaoh, there was an offer on the table all the time, again and again and again. Okay, let my people go. And I think here it's the same. We should put an offer on the table during these strikes and say very clearly what we want to achieve. This is very important with regard to international community, with regard to our enemies view us, and with regard to internal needs. So that's the basic principle that I thought of when I wrote this. And here I think that it's time for us not to start from the end, like not to start from compromising all the time. We should start from putting right on the table what we believe will satisfy us with regard to our security. And I think what should satisfy us is the same principle of 2006, of 1701, which is essentially disarming Hezbollah in the area which is south to the Litani River. This is, by the way, 25 kilometers from the Israeli border in most cases. It's not withdrawal, it's not pushing. There is a difference. This is disarm. It means that there is no munition of Hezbollah in South Lebanon at all. Yet the problem with the previous arrangement was that there was no effective mechanism, and from day one, Hezbollah never implemented it. Like the day after it was signed, Hezbollah was there, putting a lot of efforts in rebuilding its capabilities in South Lebanon in different ways. And that's why I think that this time Israel needs to make sure that any arrangement will prevent Hezbollah from recovering. That's a very important principle, whether giving us legitimacy to get in or bringing a much more effective international force that is willing to clash with Hezbollah, or putting down deadlines, whatever it is. There are tons of ideas that we can talk about. And you know what? I even thought I'm positive that the other side will not agree to all of these ideas, but I think it doesn't matter. Eventually, Israel must define from a position of strength, which this is where we are now. We must define what we want, what is needed for our security. The world should know that all these ideas that we were talking about until today with the mediator, Amos Hochstein, the American mediators, didn't meet the security needs of the state of Israel, didn't truly meet what we needed for our security to make sure that we are not going to find the terrorists on our living rooms.
Yes, very clear that. I would like to pause for a second for two related questions by reporters. Going back to what you said about the financial institutions, etc., I have a question for a reporter with Iran International, which is a dissident TV station. He says, he asks this, the Hezbollah military wing was badly attacked. Do you think they could recover if the attacks from Israel stop? And what do you think is the most likely source of their financial support today? We mentioned the drugs in the south, but
Yeah. Look, I didn't see research that could tell me specifically the division between the Iranian support and the drugs money and the MAF money, okay, which mainly different kind of crimes but not drugs. It is clear that in the past less than a decade, Hezbollah developed a lot of self-income resources like the drugs from Syria. That's very clear. But at the same time, the Iranian support here is crucial, especially with munition. We've seen the shipments coming from Iran into Iraq and then to Syria. We've seen the manufacturing in the industry, the advanced weapon industry in Syria that was actually captured by the Iranians, I would say below the surface, and manufacturing munition for Hezbollah on Syrian land. And this should all of this should be dealt. I cannot talk about numbers because I don't think it would be reliable enough. The numbers that we have are from a few years ago, and I'm not sure I want to talk about numbers.
okay, thank you. And a second question from a Japanese reporter relates to Iran. We know that Iran is Hezbollah's patron, and realistically, Iran basically lost one of the tentacles in its ring of fire, you know, theory of encircling Israel, which is Hamas. Hamas holds 101 hostages, but militarily is no longer an effective force. You think at this point, before Israel goes deeper militarily, ground incursion, whatever, do you think at this point maybe Tehran is going to tell Nasrallah, cut down your losses, climb down the tree, so that they save Hezbollah basically before Israel escalates?
There is a difference between what I hope for to to what will truly happen. I hardly believe it will happen because of the very radical ideology that my enemies are holding. I hope it will happen because, as I've said, a lot of capabilities of Hezbollah were damaged. We are not at the situation as we were a week ago. And I want to see, things going back to normal here, but as I've said, under the conditions that we are not a threat anymore.
Yeah, so essentially such a solution now, for example, Iran telling Hezbollah to back down would actually, in some way, in some distorted way, be like less good for Israel, because that would mean that they retain the capability, recover, and attack in 4 years, in 10 years, etc.
I think it's a very hypothetical question. It's not even on the table. I don't see how the Iranians are now telling to Hezbollah to cease its fire after he said that it will only cease its fire once there is a ceasefire in Gaza. I think more is needed to bring them to this point, more strikes to bring them to this point. I hope that if they will say that, maybe they will say that to Hamas, if Hamas is willing to listen. I'm not sure. And maybe this way few problems could be solved, maybe even with the hostages. But this is a hope rather than an assessment.
Okay, now I have there's two questions from reporters coming in, and also I have another question to ask myself from you. First of all, we all kind of speculate about what you just discussed. How much is Nasrallah a lackey of Iran, and how much is he like working as a Lebanese Shiite? We know from 2006, after the war, he said quite frankly, he said, if we had known what Olmert is going to do to us, with the ground incursion, we would have not have kidnapped the 3 soldiers. Do you think today, Sunday, after last week, everything that happened, and even before that, all the 11 months, even after his doubling down during the speech about the connection to Gaza, do you think he regrets that decision on October 8th?
Today, maybe. A week ago, definitely not. Definitely not. I think that he wanted a campaign. He wanted a campaign of his own. He was completely prepared for a campaign of his own. Radwan brigade units were completely prepared for an invasion. I've been saying that from day one. I think that once he got the achievement of the 60,000 Israelis that are evacuated, he didn't need anything else. It was enough at this point, while Hamas is still harassing Israel from the south. And he wanted to preserve this achievement. So the goals of the war for Nasrallah changed during the time. I think that now, after a week of fighting, for me, it was difficult to analyze his intentions, because I would believe that he would want either to preserve or even a ceasefire. But as you can see from what happened in the past night, clearly he is not interested in saying, okay, let's cease fire. He's interested in retaliation, except it looks like the retaliation that he executed doesn't seems like what we imagined. We imagined something greater, and maybe there is more to come. I don't know. I'm very careful with analyzing my enemy's intentions since October 7th. And even in the article I've sent you, I was very careful in doing that. I'm trying to see the reality as it is. Like, what's the capabilities of my enemies, what's their ideology, and how these two are combined. In this, I don't accept the conversation about Hezbollah as Lebanese or Shiite or Iranian, or I don't see this like this. I think that Nasrallah is a Muslim Shiite patriot before everything. He truly believes in the Islamic Revolution values coming from Iran. And in his point of view, there is no contradiction between his Lebanese identity. Because in his point of view, to make Lebanon an Islamic state That's the ultimate goal. He wants to do it for Lebanon, for his people in Lebanon. This is his interest. This is what he believes in. So he don't see this need to choose between one or the other. For him, they are going together.
Yeah, I'm just puzzled about, it's interesting this, the Sunni Shiite kind of axis here is odd because naturally they're not friends, let's put it this way. Um, I have two more questions from reporters, and then we'll wrap up. One of them, regarding the Obama administration, there used to be a project called Cassandra Project of undercutting the Hezbollah funding from illicit sources like drugs in South America. Do you think if Obama had not frozen the Cassandra Project, Hezbollah would have been in a worse off place today, financially or militarily or both?
Wow, I don't know whether Cassandra projects was enough. Maybe we needed like 10 or 20 Cassandra projects in all of the countries in the world, that it will be enough. But I do believe in cutting the finance, as I've said, with relate to the banks. By the way, the banks that I've mentioned before, attacking the banks mean attacking the capability of Hezbollah to support his military operatives and their families financially. That's the meaning of that. So they have nothing in return if he cannot pay them. And again, even though they are very religiously motivated, this is also important. Eventually, people have to eat. And this is very, very important to make sure that we cut the finance, whether it's globally in Cassandra project or locally with the Hezbollah banks.
Okay, another question from a Spanish reporter. We know that Hezbollah's arsenal is huge. They've been mostly using, let's say, the lower tier of Katyusha rockets, RPGs, short-range rockets. Do you think like a bigger Israeli offensive would trigger them using the bigger rockets, more precise rockets, deeper into Israel, maybe strategic sites, etc.?
Yes, and they already did. We are now writing something about it that will be published in the next few hours. We are still researching that. But it looks like tonight what was used is not the simple grants.
Yeah, the
It's something
Fadi,
else.
the Fadi 1 and Fadi 2 rockets. I wanted to
Yeah,
ask you,
there is no Fadi 1 and Fadi 2. It's just a new name for something else that already exists.
I see. Okay, thank you for the correction. Just as a technical question, I'm not a missile expert in any capacity at all, but aren't rockets launched at deeper strategic sites inside Israel in some sense less of a challenge to our defensive mechanisms like Iron Shield and the Arrow because the flight, the ballistic trajectory is larger and the flight path is longer?
First, I agree. The longer the range, the easier to intercept. You have more time. That's very natural. But if these are launched in huge barrages, bigger than what we've seen tonight, it is becoming more of a problem. And there is no 100%, and you've seen this today. We had hits in populated areas, and some homes were destroyed in some places. So that's why eventually it doesn't matter. This is a threat that should be eliminated. And I would say one more thing: we cannot live like that. Like again, we are afraid to go on the main roads here because we know that the main roads are defined open areas, and rockets can kill you if you drive on the main roads. They are not intercepted. Okay, so there is a limit of how much risk we can take and how much, for how long we can send Israelis to the bomb shelters, shutting down the daily lives. This should be solved.
Yeah, just to fine tune this point for our listeners on the line. We're just doing a Zoom, and because you wanted to give us the courtesy of not running and hiding in the middle of it, you're doing it from the safe room in your house. I
Yes.
want our listeners to be aware of that. I have one more question, and then I want to wrap up. Specifically, the person that was killed on Friday, Ibrahim Akil, was not a very nice person, in understatement. And from what we've seen in Arab social media accounts, there's a lot of Syrians, a lot of people all around the region who have an open account with him and with Hezbollah in general. I know the enemy of my enemy is my friend doesn't always hold in the Middle East because Israel is a very good common denominator for bringing, oil and water or Sunni and Shia together. But still, couldn't Israel somehow clandestinely or somehow kind of use this energy to I don't know, the Christians in northern Lebanon, the Syrians, even remains of ISIS, couldn't they leverage this against Hezbollah now that Hezbollah is somehow weakened?
When you use ISIS against Hezbollah or Hezbollah against ISIS, you end up with a terrorist organization, doesn't matter who it is, so I wouldn't recommend. With regard to the Christians of Lebanon, been there, tried that in the 80s, didn't work. I think it's time for the Lebanese to decide for themselves. For now, Hezbollah is still the strongest militia in Lebanon. There is still enough munition and mechanism, but more is needed to open the path, I will put it this way, for others, opponents of Hezbollah, to really stand up. But again, we cannot stand up instead of them. They should do it by themselves. When we tried to do it for them, we failed. And the Lebanese, including Lebanese diaspora, again, we've been saying that for many months, should do that. They definitely should stand up against this terrorist organization. By the way, one of the ways to do it is to make sure that Hezbollah is not a political party in Lebanon. This is insane. How come a terrorist organization is also a political party with a political power, while all the exits and the entrances to Lebanon are under its minister?
That is true, but again, this brings this question of, if you target like a member of parliament, it looks different, even though, as you said, Israel doesn't enjoy the legitimacy in any capacity of its fighting. Sarit Zehavi, thank you very much for your time. And
I didn't mean that we should target the members of parliament. I meant that the Lebanese should make sure that Hezbollah cannot be part of its political system.
the question is how this is enforced now that the situation, they're embedded basically now.
It's not enforced. It's not enforced.
Yeah. No, I'm asking, I'm thinking aloud with you. How can the Lebanese, let's say, political corpus, which is dominated by Hezbollah and not very strong in itself because of their constitution and all these things, how can they rise up to purge or remove Hezbollah from their political system and keep it just as a militia? You said Hezbollah is the strongest militia in the area. I think it's considered maybe the strongest non-state militia in the world today.
I think that eventually it will have to happen violently. Like, I don't see how Hezbollah will agree all of a sudden to not be part of its political system. I don't see how Lebanon has any prospect as long as Hezbollah is not disarmed. And again, Israel's mission is not to bring a new future to Lebanon. That's Lebanese mission. Our mission is to bring security to our people.
Certainly. Just to clarify, though, I don't think a full destruction of Hezbollah, as was the war aim of against Hamas, is anywhere in the cards, simply because Hezbollah is too big of a militia for Israel to aspire to completely destroy it violently on its own. Do you agree with that assessment?
I agree with that, and that's why I talked about the mechanism for diplomacy, and that's why I thought it's really important to talk about it from now, even though it is clear that Israel will continue a little bit more, at least a little bit more. I think from now we should put the prospect of what is needed, what should be done on the table, and negotiate that with the Americans and the French and other international players.
Okay, so Sarit Zehavi, president of the Alma Center for Education and Research, thank you very much for your time. Personally, I would like to wish us all, and especially residents of the North like you, quiet days ahead. And I would like to thank Ali Naor for facilitating this Zoom briefing and remind our listeners that this will be also on our YouTube channel, the Jerusalem Press Club channel, in a few hours. Thank you so much, Sarit, for your time.
Thank you.